कारणगणागणातं प्राप्तस्य कल्याणगुणनभस्य वन्दे गुरोश्री चरणरविन्द महाप्रभु कीर्तननित गीत वादित्रमाद मन सुरसेन महाप्रभु रुक्तस्तथा भजय वशैदे रोमाञ्चकं पाशुतरङ्गभज वन्दे गुरोश्री चरणरविन्द श्रीविग्रहाराधननितनाना सिंहारतन्मन्दिरमार्जनादो शिविग्रहारा श्रीविग्रहाराधननितनाना सिंहारतन्मन्दिरमार्जनादो भक्ता निजुन्ततोऽपि वन्दे गुरोश्री चरणरविन्द वन्दे गुरोश्री चरणरविन्द वन्दे गुरोश्री चरणरविन्द चतुर्वेद श्री भगवत प्रसाद सावधान तीप्तां हरिभक्त संग कृतैव तीप्तिं भज सदैव वन्दे गुरोश्री चरणरविन्द वन्दे गुरोश्री चरणरविन्द वन्दे गुरोश्री चरणरविन्द श्री राधिका माधवरपार माधुर्यलीला गुणरूपनान्मा प्रतीक्षणा स्वादनलोलपश वन्दे गुरोश्री चरणरविन्द वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं निकुञ्ज जोनारतिकलिशिदय जाजालि बीजो निरपेक्षणीया तथा त्रिदाक्षा ततिवल्लभश वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं साक्षादरित्रेण समस्तशास्त्रै रुक्तस्तथा भातैव शैदी किन्तु प्रभुर्ज प्रिय एव तस्य वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं यश प्रसादो भगवत्प्रसादो यस्य प्रसादन नागतितोऽपि दयं स्तुवं तस्य यशसि सङ्गं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं वन्दे गुरो श्रीचरणरविन्दं नमो ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने नमः। नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी प्रशांत देशतारिणे नमः। Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Prabhu Nityananda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Jaya Nitai Gauranga, Jaya Nitai Gauranga, Nitai Gauranga, Jaya Gaur Hari. Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Jagannatha, Baladeva, Jaya Subhadra, Jaya Jaya Sitaram, Jaya Sitaram, Sitaram, Jaya Lakshman Hanuman. Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha, Lakshmi Narasimha, Jaya Lakshmi Narasimha. Jaya Radha Nil Madhav Radha Nil Madhav Radhe. Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Vishwapad Brahmamsa Parivraja Shri Mata Vachana Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai ISKCON Founder Srila Prabhupada ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki Prem se Gaur Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda ki Radha Krishna Gopalapna Sam Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki Vrindavan Mathura Dham ki Mayapur Navadvip Dham ki Ganga Maya ki Yamuna Maya ki Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani ki Ananta Kuti Vaishnavindra ki Nitai Gaur Brahmanande, all glories simple devotees, all glories simple devotees, all glories to simple devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada ki.
Namaste Narasimhaya, Namaste Narasimhaya, Praladadayine, Praladadayine, Hiranyakashipurvashaka, Hiranyakashipurvashaka, Shilatantanakalaye, Shilatantanakalaye, नरसिंहो परतो नरसिंहो
हितो नरसिंहो परतो नरसिंहो
यतो यतो यामि ततो नरसिंहो
यतो यतो यामि ततो नरसिंहो
बहिर्नरसिंहो हृदये नरसिंहो
बाहिर्नरसिंहो हृदये नरसिंहो
नरसिंहमदिं शरणं प्रपद्ये
नरसिंहमदिं शरणं प्रपद्ये
तव करकमलवरेणका अद्भुतशृङ्गा दलिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृङ्गा केशवदीता नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे
तव करकमलवरेणका अद्भुतशृङ्गा ललिता हिरण्यकशिपु तनुभृङ्गा केशवदीता नरहरिरूपा जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे जय जगदीश हरे
जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव
जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव
जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा
जय प्रभु
जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा जय गुरुदेवा
जय गुरुदेवा
नरसिंह भगवान की जय।
नमो नमः तुलसी कृष्ण प्रेयसी नमो नमः राधा कृष्ण सेवा पाबो ए अभिलाषी राधा कृष्ण सेवा पाबो જે તો માર શરણ લોય તારા વાંચ પૂર્ણ હોય. કૃપા કોરી કોરો તારે વૃંદાવનવાસી. મોરાએ વિલાસ વિલાસ કુંજ દિયો વાસ. નયને હેરી બો સદા યુગલ રૂપ રાસી. એ નિવેદન ધારો સકીરાનું ગાત કરો. સેવાદિ કરો દિયે કરો નિજ દાસી. દીન કૃષ્ણ દાસે કોઈ એ ન મોરા હોય. શ્રી રાધા ગોવિંદા પ્રેમે સદા એન બાસી. શ્રી રાધા ગોવિંદા પ્રેમે સદા એન બાસી. यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे. यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे. यानि कानि च पापानि ब्रह्महत्यादिकानि च तानि तानि प्रणश्यन्ति प्रदक्षिणा पदे पदे. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi, Jaya Vrinda Devi. Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Tulsi Maharani. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Vrinda Devi Tulsi Maharani ki jai.
Mercy upon him and make him a resident of Vrindavana. My desire is that he also grant me residence. Thus, within my wish, I shall behold the beautiful person Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a follower of Kahodanso's Virgin. Please give me the privileged devotional service and make me your own maid servant. This very fallen lowly servant of Krishna prays. May I always swim in the love, Shri Radha and Govinda. Tulasi Maharani ki jai. There are 10 fences in the matter of chanting holy name that should be avoided, and they are as follows. 1. To blaspheme the devotees who have dedicated their life for the propagation of the name of the Lord. 2. To consider the name of the demigods and allow Shiva or Brahma to be equal to independent and name Lord Vishnu. 3. To disobey the order of the spiritual master. 4. To blaspheme the Vedic literature or literature in pursuance of Vedic version. 5. To consider the glory of chanting Hare Krishna to be imagination. 6. To give some interpretation to the name of the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activity and the strength of chanting the holy name. 8. To consider chanting Hare Krishna one of the auspicious ritualistic activities, offering the Vedas are fruity activities, karma, kanda. 9. To instruct a faithless person about the glorious holy name. 10. To not complete faith in the chanting holy names, and to maintain material attachments in understanding so many instructions on this matter. It is also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be a Vaishnava must carefully guard against these 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve desired success. Krishna Prema. Now let us offer most humble obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. They are just as I treat who can fulfill to everyone, and they are full of compassion, fallen, conditioned souls. Shri Chaitanya Shikshastakam ki jai. Jeto Darpanamarjanam Pavamahadavagni Nirvapanam Shriya Kairava Chandrika Vitaranam Vidyavatu Jivanam Anandam Buddhivardhanam Patipatam Purnamita Sadhanam Sarvatma Snapanam Paravijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Namakali Bahuta Nija Sarva Shaktis Tatra Pita Niyamita Smaranina Kalaha Etadishi Tava Kripa Bhagavam Mamapi Durudevami Disham Yaha Janina Nuragaha Trinatapi Sunichena Tarorapi Sahishnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtanya Sada Harihi Nathanam Natjanam Natsundarim Kavitam Vajagadisha Kamaye Mama Jammani Jammanishware Pavata Bhaktir Haituki Tvai Ayi Nanda Tanuja Kinkaram Patitam Mang Vishame Pavam Buddha Kripaya Tava Pada Pankaja Sthita Duri Satesham Vichintaya Nayanam Garada Shuru Daraya Vadanam Gadgada Rudaya Gira Pulakai Nichitam Bapu Kata Tava Nama Grahane Bhavishati Yuga Idam Nimishena Chakshusha Pravisha Idam Shunya Idam Jagat Sarvam Govinda Virahena Me Ashrisava Padratam Pinnastumam Darshanam Marmhatam Karotuva Yatha Tatha Va Vidathatu Lampato Mudprana Natha Susa Eva Naparaha Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Shri Chaitanya Glory to Sri Krishna Sankirtana, which connected the heart of all the dust accumulated for years and extremely far conditional life of repeated birth and death. This Sankirtana movement is the prime benediction of humanity at large because it spreads the race and benediction, increase the ocean transcendent bliss, and enable us to fully taste the nectar for which always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone grants all benediction human beings. Thus you have hundreds of millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendent names you have invested all your transcendent energies. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness enable us to easily approach you by holy name. But I'm so unfortunate I have no attraction for them. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in humble state of mind, thinking with devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such a state of mind, we can chant holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to commit wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causes, devotional service, birth after birth. O Son Nanda, I am your eternal servitor, yet somehow I fall into the ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one atom to your lotus feet. O my Lord, when my eyes bedecked with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant the holy name, when my voice choke up on the hair, my body stand and the recitation of your name. O Govinda, feeling of separation, I'm considered a moment to be like a Milanda. Tears are flowing from my eyes are torrents of rain, and I'm feeling all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and shall remain so if he handles me roughly by his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipable Lord, unconditionally. Shri Chaitanya Shastakam Ki Jai. Salatharanam prayers Ki Jai. Om Jnana Timirandasya Yananjana Shalakaya Chakshumritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahakana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Shakham Vitam Shcha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhuttare Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pachadate Shatarini Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhuttale Srimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Iti Namini Shri Varshabhanavi Devi Daitaya Kripaptaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Daine Prabhave Namaha Madhuryo Chala Premadya Shurupa Nuka Bhaktida Shri Gaura Karna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarini Rupanuga Viruta Pasiddhanta Dvanta Harini Namo Gaura Kishoraya Sashad Vairagya Murtaye Vipalambara Sambodhe Padam Pujayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Sachidananda Namini Gaura Shakti Swarupaya Rupanuga Varayate Gauravir Baba Bhumistvam Nirtishta Sajana Priya Vaishnava Sava Bhama Shri Jagannathaya Te Namaha Vancha Kalpatarupishcha Kripa Sindhu Bhevacha पतितानं पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः नमो महावदन्याय कृष्णप्रेमपदायते कृष्णाय कृष्णचैतन्यनाम्ने गौरतिषे नमः पञ्चतत्त्वात्मकं कृष्णं भक्तरूपस्वरूपकं भक्तावतारं भक्ताख्यं नमामि भक्तशक्तिकं हे कृष्ण करुणसिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिकान्त राधाकान्त नमोऽस्तुते जयतां सुरथोर्भङ्गो मम मन्द मतिर्गति मत्सर्वस्वपदं भोजो राधामदनमोहन दिव्यद्वृन्दारण्यकौपजुमदः श्रीमद्रानागार सिंहासनस्थो श्रीमद्राधाशिलगोविन्ददेवो पृष्ठारिभिः सेवमनो स्मरामि श्रीमान् रासारसरम्पि वंशीवत ततस्थित कर्षं विनुसनेर्गोपीर्गोपीनाथ श्रीयेस्तुनः तप्तकाञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधे वृन्दवनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये जय श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानन्द श्री अद्वैत तथा श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृन्द हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे श्री ब्रह्म संहिता प्रेयर्स ईश्वर परम कृष्ण सच्चिदानंद विग्रह अनाधिराज गोविंद सर्वकारण कारणम चिंतामणि प्रखर सद्मसुख प्रवीक्ष लक्षारितेषु सुरभिरपि पालयन्तं लक्ष्मी सहस्रशतसम्भ्रमसेव्यमानं गोविन्दमादिपुरुषं तमहं भजामि मेनुकोऽनन्तमरविन्ददलायताक्षं पार्हर्वतं समसितं पुतसुन्दराङ्गं कन्दर्पकोटिकमनीयविशेषशोभं गोविन्दमादिपुरुषं तमहं भजामि आलोलचन्द्रकलसवनमालवंशी रानङ्गदं प्रणयकेलिकलाविलासं श्यामं त्रिपङ्कललितं नियतप्रकाशं गोविन्दमादिपुरुषं तमहं भजामि अङ्गान्यस्य सकलेन्द्रियवृत्तिमान्ति पश्यन्ति पान्ति कलयन्ति चिरं जगन्ति आनन्दचिन्मयसतुचलविग्रहस्य गोविन्दमादिपुरुषं तमहं भजामि अद्वैतमचोतमनादिमनन्तरूपम् आद्यं पुराणपुरुषं नवयौवनं च वेदेषु दुर्लभम् अदुर्लभम् आत्मभक्तो गोविन्दमादिपुरुषं तमहं भजामि पन्थास्तुकोटिशतवत्सरसम्प्रगाम्यो वायुरथाभिमनसो मुनिभङ्गवानं सोऽभ्यस्ति यत्प्रपदसिम्यविचिन्त्य तत्त्वे गोविन्दमादिपुरुषं तमहं भजामि एकोऽप्यसौरचयितुं जगदन्तकोटिं यच्चक्तिरस्ति जगदन्तचयायदन्त अन्तन्तरस्थपरमाणुचयन्तरस्थं गोविन्दमादिपुरुषं तमहं भजामि यद्भावपवितधियो मनुजस्तथैव सम्प्राप्य रूपमहिमासनयानपूषा सुप्तर्यम् एव निगमप्रथिताः स्तुवन्ति गोविन्दमादिपुरुषं तमहं भजामि आनन्दचिन्मयरसप्रतिपाविताभिस्तार्प्य एव निजरूपतया कलाभिः गोलोक एव निवसत्यकलात्मभूतो गोविन्दमादिपुरुषं तमहं भजामि प्रेमाञ्जनच्युतभक्तिविलोचनेन सन्तः सदैव हृदयेषु विलोकयन्ति यं श्यामसुन्दरमचिन्त्य गुणस्वरूपं गोविन्दमादिपुरुषं तमहं भजामि रामादिमूर्तिषु कलान्यमेन तिष्ठं नानावतारमकरो भुवनेषु किन्तु कृष्णस्वयं समभवत् परमं परमं यो गोविन्दमादिपुरुषं तमहं भजामि
Krishna, who is known as Govinda, is the supreme godhead. He has a
Speak louder.
Krishna, who is known as Govinda, is the supreme godhead. He has eternal, blissful spiritual body. He is the origin of all. He has no other origin, and he is the prime cause of all causes. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, the first progenitor, who is tending the cows, yielding all desire, in abodes built with spiritual gems, surrounded by millions of purpose trees, always served with great reverence and affection by hundreds of thousands of Lakshmis or Gopis. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is adept in playing on his flute, with blooming eyes like lotus petals, with a head decked with peacock's feather, with the figure of beauty tinged with hue of blue clouds, and his unique loveliness charming millions of cupids. I worship Govinda, the primeval lord, round whose neck is swinging a garland of flowers, beautified with the moon locket, whose two hands are adorned with the flute and jeweled ornaments, who always revels in pastimes of love, whose graceful threefold bending form of Shamasundara is eternally manifest. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, whose transcendental form is full of bliss, truth, substantiality, and is thus full of the most dazzling splendor. Each of the limbs of the transcendental figure possesses in himself the full fledged functions of all the organs and eternally sees, maintains, and manifests the infinite universes, both spiritual and mundane. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is inaccessible to the Vedas but obtainable by pure unalloyed devotion of the soul, who is without a second, who is not subject to decay, is without a beginning, whose form is endless, who is the beginning and the eternal Purusha, yet he is a person possessing the beauty of blooming youth. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, only the tip of the toe of whose lotus feet is approached by the yogis who aspire after the transcendental and betake themselves to pranayama by drilling the respiration, or by the jnanis who try to find out the non differentiated Brahman by the process of elimination of the mundane, extending over thousands of millions of years. He is an undifferentiated entity, as there is no distinction between potency and the possessor thereof. In his work of creation of millions of worlds, his potency remains inseparable. All the universes exist in him, and he is present in his fullness in every one of the atoms that are scattered throughout the universe at one and at the same time. Such is the primeval Lord whom I adore. I adore the same Govinda, the primeval Lord, in whose praise men, who are imbued with devotion, sing the mantra suktas told by the Vedas, by gaining their appropriate beauty, greatness, thrones, conveyances, and ornaments. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, residing in his own realm Goloka, with Radha resembling his own spiritual figure, the embodiment of the ecstatic potency possessed of the 64 artistic activities, in the company of her confident Sakis, embodiments of the extensions of her bodily form, permeated and vitalized by his ever blissful spiritual rasa. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who is Shyamasundara, Krishna himself with inconceivable, innumerable attributes, whom the pure devotees see in their heart of hearts, with the eye of devotion tinged with salve of love. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, who manifested himself personally as Krishna and the different avatars in the world in the forms of Rama, Nrisimha, Vamana, etc., as his subjective portion.
Shrimad Bhagavatam Grantaraj Ki Jai, Shrimad Bhagavad Gita Grantaraj Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Tinamani. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Satarine. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So today we're going to finish the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita and then go back to the Srimad Bhagavatam starting tomorrow. And we're on text 19. Yomam evam asamodo janati purushottamam sasarvavid bhajate mam sarvabhavena bharata. Translation. Whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this is Krishna speaking about himself. Whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, without doubting, is the knower of everything. He therefore engages himself in full devotional service to me, O son of Bharata, Arjuna. Okay, so who's going to read the purport?
There are many philosophical speculations about the constitutional position of the living entities and the supreme absolute truth.
Do you know
Now,
what it means when it says constitutional position? Do you know what that means?
No.
Yes,
like-
no. Yes.
So like something like a prime minister, like constitutional, or like a president.
Well, uh, no, it has a bigger meaning than that. Huh? What? Say one at a time. What did you say? What's that? Set of principles. Okay. What principles? Okay. What did you say? Yeah, that's the constitutional position. We are constituted. That that is who we are. We're the eternal servant of Krishna. That is our constitutional position. Doesn't have anything to do with the Constitution of the United States, right? But there is some relationship. It's who you actually are. It's identifying you. So our constitutional position is to be the eternal servant of Krishna.
Okay.
Jivera Swarupahaya Nityera Krishna Das. What is our real position or our constitutional position? We are the eternal servant of Krishna. That defines who we are. Okay, go ahead.
Now, in this verse, the Supreme Personality of Godhead clearly explains that anyone who knows Lord Krishna to be the Supreme Person is actually the knower of everything. The imperfect knower goes on simply speculating about the absolute truth, but the perfect knower, without wasting his valuable time, engages directly in Krishna consciousness. The devotional service of the Supreme Lord. Throughout the world of Bhagavad Gita, this fact is very stressed at every step, and still there are so many stubborn commentators on Bhagavad Gita who considers the supreme absolute truth and the living entities to be one and the same.
Okay, so in this one little paragraph gives you the description of what is the truth and what is deviation from the truth. The truth is that one cannot know God by speculation. Speculation means you come up with theories. That's not the way to know God. You have to have fact. So, what are facts? Right now, we are in the material world, and we have a material body that is covering our eternal soul. Now, our soul is eternal. But if we identify with the temporary body we have that's always changing, then we suffer birth, old age, disease, and death. Now, someone will say, well, wait a minute. Are you saying you don't suffer birth, old age, disease, and death? Everybody suffers birth, death, old age, and disease. That's true. But if you become conscious of your eternal relationship with Krishna and act in that consciousness, this is the last time you're going to experience birth, death, old age, disease, and death. You'll be liberated and go back to the spiritual world where we all came from. But if we simply eat, sleep, mate, and defend like animals in this lifetime, then we will experience over and over again in many different lifetimes birth, death, old age, disease, and death. So, do we accept that this is fact? Well, you know for one thing you're experiencing birth, death, old age, and disease, and death. Number two, you are being told by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita that there's a chance that you can liberate yourself from this vicious, repeated cycle. And not only that, Krishna gives more information. He says there are 8,400,000 species. Already to come to the human birth, we have gone through 8 million species, aquatics and plants and reptiles and bugs and birds and mammals, and then we come to the human form. And even in the human form, there are 400,000 different species. But this is counting the whole universe, not just the Earth. So we see that it's a rare thing to come to the human birth, but it's only in the human birth that we have a chance to liberate ourselves from the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. So, and that is what is the purpose of human life, the real purpose. The false purpose is to use all the assets that we have, the 5 senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, and then the mind, intelligence, and the ego, to use these are called the senses for acquiring knowledge. If we don't acquire spiritual knowledge and we simply use these assets that we have to improve eating, sleeping, mating, and defending like animals, then we stay in the cycle of birth, death, old age, disease, and death, and repeat it over and over again and through the different species. Once you come to the human species, you can still fall down into the animal and plant species again. It all depends on the activities that we perform and the desires that we have and the sins or pious activities that we perform during this lifetime. So we see that it's a vicious cycle, and there are many cycles in nature. You have the carbon cycle, the hydrogen cycle, the potassium cycle. There's so many different cycles in nature that keep it self-sufficient. But there is this cycle also of birth, death, old age, and disease. Can we free ourselves? Well, that's the message of Krishna. And it's relatively easy in this age. It was much harder in previous ages, but in this age, because it's such a negative time for spiritual life, Krishna has made it very easy. Okay, so and Prabhupada says here in this purport, the imperfect knower,
Without wasting his
goes on simply speculating about the absolute truth, but the perfect knower, without wasting his valuable time, engages directly in Krishna consciousness, the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. Throughout the whole of Bhagavad Gita, this fact is being stressed at every step, and still there are so many stubborn commentators on Bhagavad Gita who consider the Supreme Absolute Truth and the living entities to be one and the same. So the beginning of spiritual life is when we accept that there's someone greater than us. If we have a false ego that can never accept that there's someone greater than ourselves, then we never really make any spiritual advancement. But as soon as we accept that there's someone greater than ourselves, and ultimately the greatest of all is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that's the beginning of our spiritual life. Then we want to find out how we can relate to Krishna and how we can engage in the service of Krishna. There was once a boy, and he was very poor, and he didn't have his parents. They had died, and he was suffering a lot. So he decided to go to the local grocer, and because he seemed to be, prosperous, he was selling food, he had a house, he had a business. So he went and he begged him. He said, "Sir, I will work for free. Will you let me do that?" So the grocer, all grocers are interested in making money. He said, "You want to work for free? No money at all?" He said, "Yes." "Okay, here, take this broom, start sweeping the store." So the boy, for 1 week he came. Every day he was working for free. And he was doing a good job. So the grocer said, "Listen, my dear boy," he said, "you're coming every day working free and then going away. Where do you live?" He said, well, I don't live in a house. I'm very poor. I just sleep under a tree. He said, how long you been living like that? He said, well, since my parents died, it's like 3 months ago. He said, well, how do you eat? He said, well, I rummage through trash, and sometimes I find food that's been thrown away that I can eat. He said, you're working very well. He said, you can live, I have a shed in the back of my store. You can live there, and I'll give you food every day. But you promise to work diligently. He said, yes, sir, I do that. So now the boy had a place to stay, and he had 3 square meals. So this went on for several years. But the boy noticed that the grocer every month would leave and stay away for 3, 4, 5 hours. So he was curious, where was he going? And he found out the grocer was going to see the governor of his province to pay taxes. Then he realized, oh my God, there's someone greater than the grocer. So some more time went by, and then one day he made a plea to the grocer. He said, sir, I've been working for you very honestly and diligently for a year. Are you pleased with my work? He said, yes. He said, do you consider me an honest person? He said, yes. He said, could you do me a favor? He said, what is that? Could you recommend me to get a job with the governor? Ah, he said, you're a very smart boy. He said, look, I'm going to do that because you deserve to be promoted. So next time he went to pay his taxes, he spoke to the governor about this boy. And the governor had a little bit of pity for the boy. He said, okay, since you're recommending him to me, you're an honest man. I believe what you say. Let him come. So now the boy was living in the governor's palace, eating the remnants of the governor's food, having clothing that was very, let's say, compatible for living in the governor's palace. In other words, he had really nice clothing now. And he got some education. He was learning how to do more complicated skills in order to serve the governor. This went on for some time, 1, 2, 3 years. But then he noticed that every once in a while the governor would leave the palace and not come back right away. And he would be away for a couple of days. So one thing led to another. He found out that the governor would go by himself into the forest. And the rumor was that he was associating with great personalities. So when one of those occasions happened, when the governor left the palace by himself, went into the forest, the boy followed him. And it was a long trek into the forest. It was a deep forest. And eventually the governor came to this ashram where there were a group of saintly persons staying deep in the forest. And he saw that the governor bowed down in front of them and sat down like a student and listened to their discourses and offered them presents. So then the boy thought, here's such an important man and is bowing down in front of these saintly people and offering them presents and listening to what they're saying. So then later on he asked permission of the governor if he could go and join those saintly people. And the governor was very pleased. And he said, yes, my boy, I'll take you with me and introduce you to them. So now the boy was living in the ashram, or the community of these saintly people, and he received spiritual instruction on a regular basis, and education, and he became a saint. And he went back to Godhead. So we see how it's possible, even for the most unfortunate person, to make spiritual advancement if they're willing to be trained in being honest, working diligently, and always trying to improve themselves. Eventually, they can realize the importance of associating with saintly people and receiving spiritual instruction, and thereby solving the ultimate problem of life: birth, death, old age, and disease, going back to Godhead. Anyone can attain such perfection of life if they're willing to be trained, and if they are genuinely humble and meticulous in doing their service and respectful. So these are the qualities that are necessary to be genuinely educated and to make genuine spiritual advancement. Most people will never reach such a state because they're too much affected by materialism, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending like dogs and cats. And they're more interested just in perfecting the eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. And the dogs and cats have already perfected it. They don't need to pay rent or buy houses. They can sleep anywhere. And they can eat almost anything. And they can reproduce anywhere. Right in the street they can reproduce. So they're more advanced than we are. And they don't have to work so hard. They can just play all day long. And they still survive. So we see dogs are superior to the materialistic people who have to work really hard and earn money and pay rent or pay mortgage and pay for this and pay for that. The dogs they're just playing all day long and having fun. Of course, they also suffer because they're living beings, but they don't work like dogs, as we say, like human beings. So this story about the young boy is very instructive, and it's a real story. It's something that every one of us can do if we have the proper association and guidance. But most of us will avoid good guidance and good association and just listen to the news and become hopeful that one day we can go and live on Mars, which is completely ridiculous. Nobody's going to go to Mars, especially Elon Musk. He's never going to make it. Or go to the moon. Nobody's going to go to the moon. So you see how we are misled by false propaganda, and we put our hopes in things that are hopeless. And that's why there's so many frustrated people in this world today. And there's so many people that are angry and shooting each other and engaging in all kinds of abominable activities. Okay, so continue reading. Vedic knowledge.
Vedic knowledge is called Shruti, learning by oral reception.
Okay, Shruti means you learn knowledge by hearing it spoken by pure devotees.
One should actually receive the Vedic message from.
Okay, put the microphone closer to your mouth.
One should actually receive the Vedic message from authorities like Krishna and his representatives.
Authorities like Krishna, right?
Krishna and his representatives. Here Krishna distinguishes everything very nicely, and one should hear from this source. Simply to hear like the hogs is not sufficient. One must be able to understand from authorities. It is not that one should simply speculate academically. One should submissively hear from Bhagavad Gita, and these living entities are always subordinate to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Anyone who is able to understand this, according to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, knows the purpose of the Vedas. No one else knows the purpose of the Vedas.
So that's why I said, as soon as you accept it as someone greater than you, just like that boy, he could see that the grocer was greater than him. Then he saw that the governor was greater than the grocer. And then he saw that the saintly men, or saintly persons, were greater than the governor. So we see, once we accept that there is someone that's superior to us, that begins a process to know who's the supreme person that we should surrender to. Go ahead. We have to surrender. Either we surrender to birth, death, old age, and disease, or we surrender to a dog, or we surrender to someone that we claim we love, or like that. If we surrender to Krishna, that's the beginning of spiritual life. Go ahead.
The word bhajati is very significant. In many places, the word bhajati is expressed in relationship with the service of the Supreme Lord. If a person is engaged in full Krishna consciousness in the devotional service of the Lord, it is to be understood that he has understood all the Vedic knowledge. In the Vaishnava Parampara, it is said that if one is engaged in the devotional service of Krishna, then there is no need for any other spiritual process for understanding the supreme absolute truth. He has already come to the point, but he is engaged in the devotional service of the Lord because he is engaged in the devotional service of the Lord.
Okay, in other words, the goal of all spiritual knowledge is to be convinced that I should be engaged in the service of the Lord according to the Lord's instructions. That is the perfection of human life. Now, most people never get to that point because they're convinced by false education in the universities, in the high schools, in the middle schools, in the elementary school, and kindergarten, that the purpose of life is to eat, sleep, mate, and defend, and to increase this as much as possible. In other words, the goal is sense gratification. It's not sense purification. It's not understanding our relationship with God. It's based on self-indulgence, indulging ourselves in all kinds of sense gratification. So most people never get past that stage, and therefore they remain prisoners of the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. Go ahead.
He has ended all preliminary processes of understanding. But if anyone, after speculating for hundreds of thousands of lives, does not come to the point of that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and that one has to surrender there, all his speculations for so many years and lives is a useless waste of time.
Now, speculation means you accept theories that are junk, basically. Like, for example, Elon Musk, he said, "Oh, we're gonna establish communities on Mars." That is complete nonsense. And you don't see Elon Musk volunteering to be the first one to go to Mars. He knows himself that going to Mars is a one-way trip. You'll never come back again, and you won't exist there either. You'll die very quickly there. So you see, there's a bunch of junk. It's all based on false premises. We can't even live peacefully on the Earth. Do you think you're going to go to Mars and have a peaceful society there? Impossible. The whole atmosphere of Mars is completely alien to human beings from the Earth. We don't have a body that's able to exist on Mars or the Moon. We have a body that can exist on this Earth planet. But because we are, as Elon Musk and other people are saying, well, we're destroying the ecology of the Earth, therefore we have to think about moving to Mars. That's a crazy idea. Why don't you purify the ecology of the Earth? Why don't you do something to stop contaminating the Earth? Well, they're trying to do that, but but the way to do that is always another speculation. Speculation means you don't know something, but you claim you know something, and when you start to try and execute that claim, it ends up a failure. Just like over the history of modern history, you'll see every president comes up with a 4-year plan or a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan to solve this problem or that problem, and all those plans fail. Just like, the war against drugs. They've been fighting the war against drugs for the last 50 years. The drug, let's say, criminals have won the war. They haven't stopped drugs coming to the United States. Why? Because the war on drugs is a sham. They're not really interested in stopping the influx of drugs. And therefore, it's worse now than it's ever been. Or, the war on poverty. Another nonsense. They haven't stopped poverty. In fact, it's gotten worse after all the years of so-called war on poverty. And then war on this and the war on that. They're all false endeavors because people make money on bad habits. Like when people are addicted to drugs, there are some people making a lot of money from it. And then when there are homeless people, some people make a lot of money due to homelessness. You might say, well, how is that? Well, they get grants to help the homeless, which they never really do, and they get all that money and they spend it for their own purposes. And now you see, the richer Jeff Bezos becomes, the more homeless people there are in Seattle. You would think, oh, maybe the homeless should, become less because the economy of Bezos is so big. No, you're getting more homeless people. Why? Because Bezos pays big salaries to the people that he exploits to make himself richer, and then those people, they pay higher prices to buy houses in the Seattle area, and eventually the common people who live on one income, they can't pay the expenses of their houses anymore. They have to sell the house and move away. And eventually, no one can, very few people except maybe the high-end people can purchase houses and properties and pay the rents that are exorbitant today in Seattle and other major cities. So we see by this suction cup of greed, where certain people become very, very rich, a lot of other people are doing somewhat well, getting good salaries, but then everybody else is suffering because they're sucking away all the money, and they're forcing prices to go higher and higher for essential commodities like food, housing, etc. So the whole system is corrupt. It's based on greed and ultimately a failure of society. So then you'll have a tremendous amount of theft and violence and what you would call hatred. The poor people begin to hate the rich people, and eventually you end up with a communist communist state, because people become very, very angry that the rich people have exploited them, and the governors also. Okay, so continue.
It's done.
You finished?
Yes.
Okay. So are there any questions about this purport? No questions? Has to be one question. If you have no questions, that means you understand every word and every sentence. Do you understand every word and every sentence? Huh? You understand? You understand every word, every sentence. Yes. Give her the microphone.
Maharaji, Hare Krishna Maharaji is mentioned in a translation that whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead without doubting is the knower of everything. So if we do devotional service and do everything, so how we become a perfect in Gita or God's words? How can we be perfect on that?
Well, it's very simple. Let's say when you were a child, your father and mother said, please take the trash out, put it in a trash can. Would you do that? Did you argue with them? Why should I do that? Why don't you do that? No. So, and they were pleased because you followed their instruction. They didn't say, get a gun and shoot yourself in the head. They didn't say anything like that. They only asked you to do simple things, and you did it. And in return, they protected you, they fed you, they bathed you, they tried to give you education, they did all these things for you, right? And you as a parent, you're doing the same thing for your child, right? But what if the child said, I'm not going to listen to what you say. I don't care what you say. Would you be happy with that? Huh?
No, Prabhuji. No, Maharaj.
Of course not. So Krishna is the ultimate parent of everyone. So if we listen to his instructions and follow them, then our life is perfect. We've achieved the perfection of human life, following the instructions of God. And those instructions are good. Don't eat meat. Don't gamble. Don't have illicit sex. Don't engage in intoxication. Well, that's good advice, isn't it? He's not telling you to do anything bad. He's telling you to avoid all bad things. And then chant Hare Krishna, the holy mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare. Where you're repeating God's name. You're not saying bad words. You're glorifying God, right? And then eat only Krishna prasadam, vegetarian food that's been offered, prepared with love and devotion and offered to God and offered back by God as his mercy. That's a good thing also. And then come to class and listen to Bhagavad Gita. That's not a bad thing. That's a wonderful thing. It teaches you so many wonderful things. How to come closer to God. Not how to become a drug addict or how to smoke marijuana or how to take fentanyl. He's not teaching you things like that. He's telling you how to stay away from things like that and do all good things, right? And in this 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we learn the 20 points of knowledge, beginning with humility. All that is good. Did you hear anything bad? Did you hear about, you can strap some bombs on your stomach and then go into a public place and set the bomb off and kill a lot of people? Did you hear anything like that? Huh? Did you hear anything bad? Have you heard anything bad? No. So why not follow this? It's all good. It's good for you, good for others also, good for your children. You see? So the goal of life is to surrender to Krishna. Now, if you don't surrender to Krishna, you're going to surrender to somebody or something. When people don't have anyone to surrender to, they surrender to their dog. They buy a dog. There's this famous German author. He wrote a book about a man who had a dog. So when the dog was a little dog, the little dog was always completely dependent on his master. But when he started getting bigger and bigger, sometimes he would try and not run away, but just exercise by running. And the master became upset that he was doing it. So what did he do? He purposely broke a leg of the dog so that he couldn't run away anymore. He wasn't trying to run away. He was just being a dog, right? Running and then running back. So he broke his leg purposely, so now the dog was completely dependent on him again. It's a very sick novel, right? But people do things like that, right? Because they want to be a controller. So everything about Krishna consciousness and Bhagavad Gita is positive. There's nothing negative. So it's the best way to live. And ultimately, you are liberated from the cycle of birth and death. You go back to Godhead. So why would people hesitate to do this? Because they have a false ego, and they cannot accept that there's someone greater than them, and especially God. So therefore, even if they listen to classes, even if they chant Hare Krishna, but they never actually surrender to Guru and Krishna, they don't make tangible progress. They make some progress, but it's not tangible. It's not sustainable. And certain things will happen immediately. They go back to what they did before: eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So this hearing process is important, but then you have to put into action what you heard. And that action is devotional service. Engaging. See, the proof that you love someone is that you will serve them. So if you love your family, then you're going to serve them. If you love yourself, then you're going to be selfish and serve yourself. If you love God, then you're going to serve God. So we should analyze ourselves. How many hours of the day are we actually serving Krishna? And how many hours of the day are we serving ourselves or other greedy people, like team leaders and CEOs, and people like that, or friends who have bad habits? So we should see in 24 hours how many hours we're actually spending serving God. Now, if you look at someone like Srila Prabhupada, it's 24 hours a day he was serving God. That's why he's a pure devotee. That's why he was able to do so many good things and create a worldwide movement called the Hare Krishna movement. So that's what happens when you decide to serve Krishna. You begin to do extraordinary things that you never thought you'd be able to do. But as long as we remain selfish, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, only serving some members of the family, and not really engaging in devotional service, then we become a first-class failure in life. There are a lot of first-class failures in this world today. You see it all the time. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions on this purport?
Thank you, Maharaj. You mentioned about the 8.4 million species.
What's that? Yeah, okay.
So my question is like, in 300 years back or 400, the human population was far less, and now it's like billions of people around. So how do we reconcile this with this 8.4 million? Does it mean like a lot of souls
No,
are?
8.4 million species.
Yeah.
It's not 8.4 million people. You're
Oh.
misunderstanding.
No. Yeah. My question is, Maharaj.
Your question is, why
yeah.
does it seem to be more human beings today than there were in the past?
Correct. Yeah.
because they're not following Krishna consciousness. So therefore there's a band. You know what band means? In Hindi? Band. What's it mean? What? Yeah. People are not practicing Krishna consciousness, so therefore they're not becoming liberated. So they're taking birth over and over again as human beings and animals. That's why you have more human beings now. There's an infinite number of living entities, but there's no attempt, or very less attempt today, of being liberated from the cycle of birth. So they're ending up in a dead end. So either they're taking birth over and over again as human beings, or less as animals. Like, for example, there are a lot of crows in India, right? There are a lot of crows here also. The same crows that are in India. How come? They're your relatives. They're the uncles and aunties and the grandfathers and the grandmothers that didn't take Krishna consciousness seriously, so they end up becoming crow. Yeah, caw, 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 like that. They're eating garbage. So did you ever ask yourself why there's so many crows in India? Those are people who didn't follow Krishna consciousness. Right. So that's a false concept that, how come there are more human beings now? Yeah, because they're not becoming liberated. There's a bund, there's a stoppage, there's what you would call a failure of achieving the human potential in life, because they're living like animals instead of living like liberated souls. Okay? Any other questions? Vidya, you don't have a question? Huh?
Yeah, one question is there, Maharaj. Whether to ask or not, I was thinking.
I could hear your thoughts.
The follow-up question, Maharaj, what Manoj Prabhu was asking. See, 8 lakh 4,000, 8 lakh 40,000.
8,400,000 species.
8,000,000 for 400,000 species. Yesterday you were mentioning that it's mandatory that if to become a human being, it's they need to go through all the.
At least they went through 8 million species to come to the human form.
Where
and,
it is
and the human form, there are 400,000 species.
Yeah, where it is written, Maharaj, in the
Padma Purana.
Padma Purana, okay.
And, well, wait a minute. I'll show you where you'll see it in the Bhagavad Gita. Just hold 1 second. So what is your question?
My question is, say, for human beings, sometimes if they are doing something, they are doing good things, it's written that they can go to higher planets or lower planets based on the karma. But in this case, we are talking about if they are not doing well, they go to the lower planets, and then again they need to take all the
go through all the species to come back to the human form. Right?
Yeah, that's what my question, Maharaj. Or they can come in the middle or somewhere. Yeah. Any options?
They go to the back of the line. Oh. Well, see, that's the point, Prabhu, that when you hear the truth, it's hard to believe it. When you hear a lie, you can accept it right away. So when you hear that there's 8,400,000 species, by the way, look up right now on the internet. How many species of life have scientists identified so far? It's not even 1.5 million, or maybe a little bit more than that. That's it. Why? Because they're only looking on the earth, but the Vedas look at the entire universe. Go ahead, say it. Yeah, that's it. 1.2. I thought you said 1.5, but it's 1.2. So they have very limited knowledge of what's going on in the universe. And they claim to be experts on materialism, but they're not. They have very limited knowledge. See? Now, how do you count species? The scientists do it based on the body, but the Vedas do it based on consciousness. There's a huge difference between the two. So the Vedic way of calculating species is consciousness, and the modern scientist way is bodies. So that's another major difference. I'm trying to find a verse from the Padma Purana. I'll have to find it. I thought it was in the Bhagavad Gita, but it's not in a purport. I'll in a few minutes I'll find it.
Sure.
Okay. So, did you have another question, Vidya, or that was it?
Yes, that's all, Maharaj.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, Maharaj.
What was your question again?
See, my question is, say if the life would take a human being, and if they are not able to go back to Godhead,
Yeah.
and in case if they fall again, and again they need to take the entire cycle of all
No,
the
it depends on their karma. So let's say they only made one or two mistakes, then they would probably get a human form of life. Let's say they made a lot of mistakes, like Jeffrey Epstein. Now they go back down to the amoeba state. They have to go through 8 million forms before they can come back to the human form of life. It all depends on how many sins that they committed. All right?
Yes.
Haribol. Any other questions? There's a chance. Yes?
Hare Krishna Maharaji is the word is that who consider the supreme absolute truth and the living entities to be one and the same. So here
That's
I
the
want.
position of the Mayavadis, the impersonalists.
So I want to know the difference between the absolute truth and what is living entities here. Prabhupada want to mention that.
See, what did I say? As soon as you accept there's someone greater than you, that's when your spiritual life begins. Now, what do the Mayavadis say? They say that Jivatma becomes Paramatma. That's what that means, that line. Read that line that you just said.
Throughout the whole of Bhagavad Gita, this fact is being stressed at every step, and still there are so many stubborn commenters on Bhagavad Gita who consider the supreme absolute truth and the living entities to be one and the same.
That's the point. The Mayavadis, or the impersonalists, they want to make the living entity and God equal, or Jivatma becomes Paramatma. And that's a false theory. It's not true. And because of that, many people are misled. They think that they can become God by doing some meditation or some kind of smoking marijuana or something. They become God. The jiva can never become equal to God. You think you're going to become equal to God? No. So it's a preposterous nonsense theory. But yet there are millions of people, millions and millions of people in India that believe it. You never heard the jiva becomes Paramatma in India? You never heard that? You heard that, Prabhu? Huh? Normal. It's called abnormal, not normal.
But Maharaj, in India, everybody say God is in our heart like that, I think, according to me.
Well, okay, but does that mean you're God because he's in your heart?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, God is in everybody's heart. That's Paramatma. That doesn't mean we are God. Just like there's a germ in your intestine. Does that mean you are that germ? No. There's a difference between that microbe or germ in your intestine and you. Although it's your intestine, but it's a different living entity. So if God is present in your heart, yeah, that's possible. God is present in everybody's heart as Paramatma, but that doesn't mean you're God. Okay. Any other questions?
Maharaj, back to what my Prabhuji asked. So, so you were also saying like the crows, about the crows, like it might be your grandparents or who didn't follow the way of life to be how it should be lived. So why they are always connected to crows like that? Even I had heard a lot, even in the annual rituals they offer food, saying that the crows will come and eat the food. They are our ancestors, like parents and all. Why it's always connected to crows? There are so many species of life, right?
Well, because the crows, especially what you would call low class, because they eat garbage, dead things. If there's roadkill, like an animal gets run over by a car, you'll see the crows will be there trying to eat the blood and the intestines or whatever there is. So this is what happens to people who are only interested in making money and using the money for sense gratification. In other words, they're very greedy. They have very unclean consciousness, so they become crows. That's why you have a lot of crows in India. You have crows here also. Right. So crow is a vile type of bird, and people who are very greedy, lusty, they can take birth as crows.
Okay, Maharaj. Thank you.
So you don't want to be like your ancestors, right? That's why
No,
you're coming to
Maharaj.
class. Otherwise, you could become a crow. I could become a crow if we ignore Krishna. So we surrender to the crow that way. We don't want to surrender to the crow. We want to surrender to Krishna.
Krishna.
Haribol.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, now we'll go back to our homework. Let's see. Okay, Krishna Chaitanya, you did your homework. Okay, can you read it? The homework is explain the differences between the spiritual world and the material world. How many other people did the homework? Let me see. 1, 2. That's it? 3? All right. Speak loudly and clearly into the microphone.
Yes, Maharaj. Hare Krishna Maharaj. So I went through the chapter 15, Maharaj, purport.
You went through what?
Chapter 15 of Bhagavad Gita.
Okay.
Yes, and look at the information and make it as a what is the difference between spiritual world and material world, and what's the common, if has anything. I wrote like that, and both spiritual world and material world has both variegatedness. It has varieties of life, and material world is the reflection of the spiritual world. Actually, spiritual world is the variegatedness in reality.
What?
Spiritual world has the variegatedness in reality.
In reality, yes.
But material world has the It's a perfect reflection of the spiritual world.
Okay.
So, in the material world, three modes of material nature dominate the people for the fruitive work people work for, and the spiritual world, devotional service, only devotional service is there.
So in the material world, people are controlled by the three modes of
modes.
material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. In the spiritual world, people are liberated from those three modes, and they engage all the time in devotional service. Okay?
Yes, so
It's possible to engage also full-time in devotional service in the material world if you follow, instructions of Guru and Krishna. Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. So if one goes to the spiritual world, he never comes back. But in the middle world, we'll be transmigrating the upper, lower, middle planetary systems in different species of life.
Okay, now the material world, because your soul is eternal, it's possible that you could stay eternally in the material world suffering birth, death, old age, and disease because your soul is eternal. But the good news is that surrender to Krishna is not controlled by the law of karma. That means that even the worst person, if they decide to surrender to Krishna, they could make tangible spiritual progress and go back to Godhead. So there is a loophole,
Right.
Because Krishna is merciful, and he does not make surrender to him subject to the law of karma. At any time, a person could surrender, even if they're the worst person in the world, and Krishna will accept them. Just like Lord Ramachandra, he accepted Vibhishan, who was a Rakshasa, the brother of Ravana, because Vibhishan surrendered to the Lord. He didn't say, no, I'm not going to accept you. You're a Rakshasa, a man-eating demon. No, he recognized the sincerity of surrender of Vibhishan and accepted him, even though he's Ravana's brother. Right? So surrender to the Lord is not subject to the law of karma. Go ahead.
In the material world, attachment for sense enjoyment and lording it over the material nature is very strong.
Yeah. Okay.
In the spiritual world, the main center is Krishna, working for Krishna.
Okay.
And in the material world, I am the
Well, you missed one thing. That is, in the spiritual world, everything and everyone is conscious. That means the rocks, the jewels, the earth, everything is conscious.
Yes, Maharaj. Yes, thank you.
You missed that one point.
Yes, Maharaj. Sorry, thank you.
But in the material world, you have some things that are conscious and some things that are not conscious. Go ahead.
Yes, Maharaj. That supreme abode of mine is not illuminated by sun or moon nor by fire or electricity. It is self-illuminated. Material world is dark. It needs sun or electricity, moon or electricity.
Yeah, in the material world, you need the sun, the moon, electricity, and fire. In the spiritual, you don't need those things because there's the illumination emanating from the body of Krishna and from all other bodies are reflecting that spiritual light called the Brahma Jyoti. So you don't need fire, electricity, sun, moon, etc. Go ahead.
In the material world, living entity is conditioned. In the spiritual world, living entity is liberated.
Conditioned means that we are under the influence of the modes of material nature. Goodness, passion, and ignorance. Now, most people would deny that. So, no, I'm independent. No. Nobody's independent in the material world. Everybody is dependent. If the sun doesn't come up, would you be able to live? No, everybody would die. So we're dependent on the sun. Who's controlling the sun? Is it Putin controlling the sun? Or Crazy Joe? Is he controlling the sun? No. Well, somebody's controlling it because it's coming up at the same time or predictable times every day, all year round. So somebody's controlling it. If someone said no, nobody's controlling it, it's just happening, they're crazy. They're ignorant. So the most ignorant people are the scientists, because they say everything happened by accident and nobody's controlling everything in the universe. What? Everything in the material world, factories, businesses, all created by intelligent people or by people. Even the criminals, they create a big cartel, and it's being done by their intelligence, right? But when you look at the universe, nobody created it. It's all happening by accident, and it's all being maintained by nobody. What? That's crazy. That's loony toony. That's nonsense. Everything in the material world that people do, they claim that they did it. They want to get the Nobel Prize, or they want to get the recognition as an author of a book or something. But then when they look at the universe, they say, nobody did it. How could you say that? Such complicated things. The movement of the planets and the sun and the moon are perfectly synchronized, and it's all happening by accident, and nobody is controlling it. These are the dumbest ideas in the whole world. Therefore, the scientists are the dumbest people. They're not the smartest people. They're dumb. And so you have Elon Musk and his SpaceX rocket that cost $3 billion, and it's made a complete mess. When it took off, it created so much dust and smoke and toxic fumes that it contaminated the whole area where it took off from. It contaminated the ecosystem. And then it goes up, and everyone says, oh, wow, and then a big bang. That's the original Big Bang, by the way. And it disintegrated the whole rocket, because $3 billion goes up in the air, and it's finished, right? So what happened, Elon? Are you going to be the next rocket that gets disintegrated? It goes up and explodes, and you no longer exist. So this is nonsense. They're trying to do things that are impossible, wasting huge amounts of money. And by the way, the United States stopped making rockets to go to the moon or Mars. They were relying on the Bezos and Elon Musk and others. Is that right? They're relying on private money. Yeah. So, and in the beginning, everyone thought, well, they're rich guys, they're smart guys, they know what they're doing, they'll be able to solve the problem. The United States is not going to waste any more money sending rockets out into nowhere and blowing up. But they're having the same problem. So the Chinese have the same problem, the Japanese have the same problem, the Indians have the same problem, the Pakistanis have the same problem, and now Elon has the same problem, and Bezos also. So they're trying to do something impossible, but they're claiming that they're going to do it. And they're using your money to do it. You're actually paying for it. Okay, go ahead.
In the material world, according to karma, he enjoys or suffers. But in the spiritual world, he enjoys eternal bliss, eternal life, and full of knowledge.
Yeah, because in the spiritual, there's no birth, death, old age, and disease. There's no pregnancy. You don't have to get pregnant and have a child. Everything is eternal there. And you don't get, there's no downside like in the material world. You don't get tickets for parking in the wrong place. You don't have to pay taxes. You don't have to worry about the IRS. There's no IRS in the spiritual world. So there are a lot of advantages going back to Godhead. Many more advantages than staying in the material world. Go ahead.
Only devotional service is transcendental, and here a material world fruitive work causes bondage.
So transcendental means you're not subject to the laws of material nature, and bondage means you're subject to the laws of material nature. So all of us are subject now to the laws of material nature because we have a material body that's controlled by material nature. Ultimately, everything's controlled by Krishna, but he does it through his servants, the demigods. So therefore, your digestion, you're not controlling it. Is anybody controlling their digestion? Do you know how you're digesting food? No. Do you know how you're making blood? No. Do you know how you make plasma? No. Do you know how you make sperm or an ovum? No. Do you know anything? I know how to roll a marijuana joint. Yeah. Okay, but do you know anything else? Not that much. So you see, people don't really know much, and they think they're independent. They're not independent. We are all dependent on superior personalities that are maintaining our own body and our movements. And so the only thing we have a little bit of control over is everybody has to eat. That's the law of nature. And everybody has to sleep also. That's the law of nature. But what you eat, you can decide. And how you want to sleep, you can decide. So we have limited free will. We're not completely free, but we have some limited free will. So the laws of material nature control everything we do, but we have some discretion about what to eat, how to sleep, who we want to get married to, and what kind of house we want, and things like that. But the general point is that we're controlled all the time by superior forces and persons called the demigods and ultimately Krishna. We are not really independent. Okay, go ahead.
In the spiritual world, by proper use of independence, he is always liberated.
Is always what?
Liberated in the spiritual world.
By proper use of independence. Yeah. So by making the right decisions of the little bit of discretion that we have limited free will. If we make the right decisions, we can go back to God. We can become liberated or transcendental from the material nature. Go ahead.
In the material world, by misuse of that independence, one becomes conditioned. So
yeah, like a drug addict. It's by misuse of their independence, they become a drug addict, and they suffer.
So minute form of independence is there in both the spiritual world and material world.
What did you say?
Minute form of independence is there for the living entities both in the spiritual world and the material world. That's common.
In the spiritual world, they use that minute independence correctly, and in the material world, they misuse it. Go ahead.
The spiritual world, consciousness is pure.
See, now the decisions you make are daily. They're not, oh, well, I surrendered to Krishna 15 years ago. No, you have to surrender every minute. Every time you wake up, you have to decide whether you're surrendered or not to Krishna. It's not like a one-time decision. It's a every second decision of your life. So most people, like, if you take part in a prayer meeting of Christians, and after the Christian minister preaches, they say, anybody who wants to be saved can walk up to the altar and you will be saved today. So people walk up and he says, okay, now say, I am surrendered to Jesus Christ. And you say, I am surrendered to Jesus Christ. Now you're saved. Okay, so then they go home and they cook chicken and they eat the chicken and then they drink some wine. Are they saved? No, they're not saved. It's a decision you have to make every second of your life. It's not one time, you walk up to the altar and the pastor puts his hand on your head and says, now you're saved. You just say, Jesus. You're not saved. You haven't changed anything. You're still eating chicken and engaging in sex and so forth. So being saved means you're actually following God's instructions. No meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex, no intoxication, chanting Hare Krishna every day, eating only prasadam, sanctified food prepared with love for Krishna and offered to Krishna, and Krishna offers it back as his mercy. And then regularly hearing Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam as we're doing, and going out on Sankirtan, coming to the temple and associating with devotees and engaging in devotional service. These are things you should never do and things you should always do. So that's the symbol that you're saved. You're following God's instructions. And you have to make the decision every day. It's not a one-time decision. Every day, every minute, every second, you have to make that decision. Okay, go ahead.
Consciousness is pure, for the spirit soul is pure in the spiritual world, but in the material world, consciousness is changed according to the association of the material qualities.
So tell me who you associate with. I can tell you who you are. So if you're associating mostly with materialistic people, you'll become a materialist, no doubt about it. Now, what is association? Going to parties with the materialists. Sitting down when the materialist is eating a chicken leg and watching them eat it and telling you how good it is. That's association. Going to the horse races and betting, or even if you go not to bet, you're watching your friends bet on the horses. That's association, right? So all these things, there's a difference between going to work and just focusing on the work, even though you have so many people around you who are materialistic. You're not associating with them. You're simply sticking to the job and then going back home and associating with devotees. So now you're not really associating with the materialists at work. You're not sitting down and watching them eat meat and things like that. So there's a difference between officially working and staying focused on your job and then coming back home and then engaging in devotional service. And there's a difference between that and then associating with the people on the job and hearing, all the nonsense that they're talking about, sports and investments and politics and so forth. Then you are associating. Okay, go ahead.
This consciousness is there in both places, Maharaj. That's the common I wrote. And the Supreme Lord is situated in
the consciousness. When you're hearing the news, when you're hearing speculations, will Trump run for president? Well, I think he will. That's all. That's all associating with nonsense. See? So if you're spending a lot of time listening to nonsense, then you become a nonsense. But if you spend your time listening to Prabhupada's lectures, then you become Krishna conscious. So it's all about, am I surrendered every second of the day, or are there periods of time during the day when I'm not surrendered and not following? Go ahead.
The Supreme Lord is situated as Paramatma in everyone's heart. That's common in both the places. In the spiritual world, every living entity is called infallible. In the material world, every living entity is called fallible.
Yeah, in the material world, we're making mistakes all the time. In the spiritual world, No one is making mistakes. They Jivera Swarupahaya Nityara Krishna Das. They understand who they are, or they understand their constitutional position. They are the eternal servant of Krishna, therefore they're eternally engaged in Krishna's service. Whereas in the material world, people are vacillating. Sometimes Krishna, sometimes Maya. Therefore, they don't make tangible progress like that. They make some progress, but it's tangential. It's not steady. Go ahead.
The living entities are eternally separated parts and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's common. And in contact with material world, they are called Jivabhuta. And those who are in oneness with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, however, are called infallible.
Okay. Your accent is so thick. Sometimes we understand what you're saying. Sometimes we don't understand what you're saying.
Sorry,
But-
Maharaj.
So basically, it says what you said was that if we're following Krishna's instructions, we are Krishna conscious. If we follow speculation, we're not Krishna conscious. Therefore, we're making mistakes all the time. Okay, go ahead.
But in the spiritual world, the body is not made of matter. Therefore, there is no change. In the
Okay,
material world,
body is you have a spiritual body. Therefore, it's not 1 year old and 3 years old and 10 years old and 20 years old, and every time it's getting bigger and bigger or smaller and smaller or whatever. No, you don't have a changing body. Your body is eternal. So it's not subject to birth, death, old age, disease. But in the material world, you have a body that's different than your soul. It's covering your soul. And most people are so ignorant, they identify with the body and ignore the soul. Therefore, they become stuck in the process of birth, death, old age, and disease. Go ahead.
yeah, that's what I wrote
That's
for the
it. Okay, thank you. So, Ria, you did your homework? Okay, give her the microphone. Who else did their homework? Was there someone else that did the homework? Go ahead.
Okay, so the homework was to make a list of similarities and differences between the material and spiritual world. So, the material world and the spiritual world share variegatedness. For example, the presence of love and desires, but the material world is a perverted reflection of the actual reality. Because love in the material world is only lust, but love in the spiritual world is pure. And they are both created and controlled by the Supreme Lord, and the Lord is present in both the material world and the spiritual world. Now here are some differences. If you are attached to the material world, then you can never get liberated. And the material world is temporary, but the spiritual world is eternal. And once you go there, you will never return.
Never what?
Return.
Okay.
There is no need for
That's not like going to Mars. When it says you'll never return, that means you're dead. But in the spiritual world, you're eternally existent. There's no birth, death. So. And who would want to come back to the material world after going to the spiritual world? Right? It's just like if you buy a really expensive car, would you like to go back to owning an old car that doesn't run right? No. So anybody who goes back to the spiritual world, they would never want to come back to the material world. Go ahead.
In the spiritual world, there is no need for sunshine, moonlight, fire, or electricity in the spiritual world because all the planets are self-illuminating. Whereas in this material world, we need a sun, whose light also ultimately comes from the Lord. In the material world, people consider themselves the proprietor, but in the spiritual world, the goal is to serve the Lord.
Yeah, because the Lord is the ultimate proprietor. So everything should be used in his service. Now, we can do that also in the material world. That's what we do in the temple. Everything in this temple belongs to Radha and Krishna, doesn't belong to us. So we use everything that we receive. So people sometimes bring ghee or they bring some fruits or whatever. We use those in the service of the Lord. Okay, go ahead. Any more?
Yeah. In the spiritual world, everyone enjoys eternal bliss, life, and knowledge, while in the material world,
Life and what?
eternal bliss, life, and knowledge. Sachidananda.
Okay.
And while in the material world, it is the opposite.
What is the opposite? What is the opposite?
Like in the material world, people are not like happy and they're not experiencing like their full knowledge, like unless you're like a devotee. But otherwise, people are experiencing the opposite.
People are experiencing what?
The opposite.
Yeah, the opposite of bliss, knowledge. What else?
And eternity. Like
Eternity.
no one
Okay.
who lives here is eternal, and they don't have full knowledge, and
Very
they're not
good.
happy.
Yes.
Okay. People in the material world are an illusion, but in the spiritual world, they see and experience reality.
Okay, so illusion. Illusion means you make a mistake and you believe something that's not true, and you act as if it's not true. So, for example, one time this young man came into our free vegetarian restaurant when we used to have it in the U District. And I asked him, I said, do you believe in God? He said, nope. I said, really? He said, well, when I was younger, I believed in God. But when I went to college, I read a book that said God doesn't exist, so I don't believe in God anymore. So, now the question is, when a person says, I don't believe in God, that means that they're no longer able to engage in those activities that would liberate them from the cycle of birth and death. So they're condemning themselves to stay in the material world and suffer birth, death, old age, and disease. So, and they do that on very limited knowledge. He reads a book that says God doesn't exist, immediately says, I don't accept God anymore, the rest of his life. That's how stupid people are. And many people write books that God does not exist, and you only have one life, so you should use this life to eat, sleep, mate, and defend, because when you die, everything is over. So that is completely false. And because of that falsity, many people ruin their lives today, and they go back into the animal kingdom in the next life. Okay, go ahead.
In the material,
You'll be surprised if you do a survey. You'll see many young people today believe God doesn't exist. There's no spiritual world. There's only this world, and therefore there's only eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. There's only engaging in self-indulgence and sense gratification as the purpose of life. And to do that, you need to make money, so you have to get a good job or start your own business or sell drugs or whatever to get money, and then you use it for sense gratification. This is how low people have gone in this age. Okay, go ahead.
in the material world, everybody is conditioned and influenced by the modes of material nature, while in the spiritual world, they are not. In the material world, the spiritual So the spirit soul is in contact with many material things like lust, anger, and greed. But in the spiritual world, everything is transcendental. And my last thing is, there is a time influence in the material world, but time is eternal in the spiritual world.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other questions? We will stop there. Yeah, you have a question?
Hare Krishna Maharaj,
Yes.
in the verse which we studied today, 15:19, Krishna is saying that whoever knows me as Supreme Personality of Godhead without doubting is knower of everything. So that he will give the complete knowledge to the devotee. Because knowledge is one of the
The
opulence
knower
of...
of everything means you know that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Okay.
Like, for example, does that mean you know the entire Vedic knowledge, all the Vedas? Not necessarily. But you know that Krishna is the origin of everything. When I say you know everything, does it mean you know the Encyclopedia Britannica word for word? No. But you know that Krishna is the origin of everything. So then, therefore, you only engage in the service of Krishna. That means you know everything.
Okay.
Like, for example, let's say you met Srila Prabhupada, let's say, 50 years ago, and you surrendered to him, and for 50 years you've been reading his books and following his instructions. That means that you're the knower of everything that your guru has taught you. And he taught you what? To always be engaged in Krishna's service. That means you're the knower of everything. Because you know that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and you're using your maximum time in the service of Krishna. Therefore, you have understood the real purport of the entire Vedic literature, which is what? That we should come to the level of pure devotional service. So if you're engaged all the time in pure devotional service, you're the knower of everything, because that's what your guru taught you. Now, do you know the entire Encyclopedia Britannica? No, you don't. But most of the information in Encyclopedia Britannica is mundane knowledge. How to eat, sleep, mate, and defend. So it's not really knowledge. Real knowledge is knowing factually your relationship with Krishna and being engaged in that service. Now you're the knower of everything.
I thought the knowledge includes the Raja Vidya also.
The Raja Vidya is all about serving the Raja. Who is the Raja? Huh? Who is the Raja?
Krishna.
Yeah. So now you know everything, because he's the knower of everything. So if you know him and you engage in his service, you are the knower of everything. That's what real Raja Vidya is. Do you know the entire Encyclopedia Britannica? No, you don't. But you don't have to know that. You have to know Krishna and your relationship to him, and then function in that relationship. Then you're the knower of everything. Okay?
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hare Krishna Maharaj. Maharaj, regarding the questions that we were asking yesterday to the people, those are not Krishna conscious. So, So my sister also did. She also listens the class. So she also did the homework and she asked many people in India.
Yeah.
Those are not Krishna conscious, and I can read some of them. Those are most of them. They said yes, but few of them they are not fully clear. So I will just highlight them those points.
Okay.
So one is, what does it mean to be part and parcel of Krishna? So person one said, God is always with me. Person two said, Krishna gave us birth in this material world. Next person said, originally we came from Krishna and after death we will merge into him.
Merge into him.
And the next person said, Krishna gave us birth. He make our body.
He made our body.
He made our body and also give us the equal mind. I don't know what does it mean, but and the next person said, yeah, that's it, I think. Yeah. And the next question, do you believe you are independent? So person first said yes, second probably, next partially, next said yes, we are independent, and another said yes, fully independent.
Well, now you know why there's so many problems in India.
And the next one, do you believe your life is happy and peaceful? First person said yes, and then next is yes, and next say no, then next yes. So these are the three questions that are little off the track. So I just highlighted these. Yes, they others
Well,
they
no,
said
the
yes.
idea that everybody said they're independent, that means they're really off the track. I mean, there's no track. So this is the dilemma of modern education.
They also said that they are happy. Yeah, that's also another.
Well, they're happy. Yeah, they didn't say why they're happy. You have to ask, why are you happy? They'll say, well, I'm making good money, I'm having good sex, or I just bought a new car. You know. So you'd have to ask them, why are you happy? Okay, we'll stop right there. Now, now your homework for next week. So we're going to read the next verse, text 20, in which it explains what are the weaknesses of the heart. So I want you to write an essay explaining what are the two weaknesses of the heart, but not simply write that down, but explain it in depth. So you'll see in the next verse, the 15th chapter, 20th verse, it says, the most important thing one has to surmount is weakness of the heart. The first fall down is caused by the desire to lord it over material nature. Thus, one gives up the transcendental loving service of the Supreme Lord. The second weakness of the heart is that as one increases the propensity to lord it over material nature, he becomes attached to matter and the possession of matter. The problems of material existence are due to these weaknesses of the heart. So you want to write an essay, not just copy down what the two weaknesses of the heart are, but actually explain it in depth by doing some research in the Shastra, in the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, and write an essay, at least 500 words, explaining more in depth what these two weaknesses of the heart are.
Maharaj, you want to suggest any additional verses that we should refer?
No,
No.
you have to do the research.
Okay.
I'm not going to do the job for you. Okay? Okay, who's going to do the research? Who's going to do their homework? Raise your hand. I got my camera right now. Go ahead, let's see. Okay, I just took the pictures, so thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. I didn't see Gupta's hand. Okay. Today's not your birthday, right? Huh?
One day you mentioned Maharaj, every day is our birthday. So everyone.
Yeah. No, that's why every day we hear about Krishna, that means it's a celebration. You gonna sing? Okay. Yeah, let her sing. Who's gonna sing? Go ahead. You can start.
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma
Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadma
Bandhu Mui Savadhana Mate
Bandhamu Savadana Mate
Bandhu Mui Savadhana Mate
Bandhamu Savadana Mate
Chahara Prasade Bhai E Bhava Turiya Jai
Pranara Prasade Bhai Baba Tariya Jai
Krishna Prapti Hoy Jaha Hoy Te
Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite
Krishna Prapti Hoy Jaha Hoy Te
Krishna Prapti Hoya Hoite
Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Koriya Kya
Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitete Goriya
Arana Kuriyo Mane Asha Arana Kuriyo Mane Asha Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttama Gati
Shri Guru Charane Rati Aise Uttama Gati
Je Prasade Pure Sarva Asha
Prasade Pure Sarva Asa
Je Prasade Pure Sarva Asha
Ye Prasade Pure Sarva Asa
चक्षुदान दिलो जे जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से
चक्षुदान दिला जे जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से
चक्षुदान दिलो जे जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से
चक्षुदान दिला जे जन्मे जन्मे प्रभु से
दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो
दिव्य ज्ञान हृदय प्रकाशितो
प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाश जाते
प्रेम भक्ति जहाँ होते अविद्या विनाश जाते
वेदे गाय जहाँ रचरितो
वेदे गाय जहाँ रचरितो
श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु अधम जनर बंधु
श्री गुरु करुणा सिंधु अधम जनर बंधु
लोकेनाथ लोकेर जीवाना
लोकेनाथ लोकेर जीवाना
हा प्रभु कोरो दया देह मोरे पाद छया
प्रभु कोरा दया देह मोरे पाद छया
हे बेजाय गुशुक त्रिभुवाना शील प्रभुपाद पतित पवाना जय प्रभुपाद जय प्रभुपाद जय प्रभुपाद जय प्रभुपाद
जय प्रभुपाद Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada
Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada
Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada
Jaya Jaya Gurudev 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 Srila Gurudev
Jaya Jaya Gurudev Gurudev Jaya Gurudev Jaya Jaya Gurudev
Namah Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine
Namah Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine
Namah Vishnupadaya Krishnapresthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Gaura Hari Bol. Nitai Gaura Hari Bol.
appreciate of your loyalty. Your fame is spread all